Some cars weren't just transportation. They were built like tanks, made to survive decades of hard use, rough roads, and endless miles. These old-school machines earned their place in history by being nearly indestructible, with engines that refused to quit and bodies that could take a beating. While modern cars rely on electronics and fragile parts, these classics proved that true durability comes from simple, tough engineering. Many are still running strong today, decades later. Here are the 13 old cars that were built to last forever, living legends of reliability and strength. Stick around till the end, and don't forget to subscribe. The 1966 Volvo 122S, more commonly known by its affectionate nickname Amazon, occupies a unique place in automotive history as one of the toughest, most unkillable, and most endearing cars of its era. At first glance, it looked like a modest mid-size European sedan, conservative in styling compared to the brash American muscle cars or the sleek Italian sports coupes of the same decade. Its design was understated, a blend of Scandinavian restraint and a hit of 1950s Americana influence in its rounded fenders and upright grille. But beneath that modest, almost humble exterior lurked an engineering ethos that made the Amazon one of the most durable, long-lasting cars ever put on the road. A machine so reliable that it became legendary for its ability to outlive owners, outlast generations, and endure punishment that would cripple most cars. The heart of the 122S was its B18 engine, a 1.8-liter inline-4 that on paper seemed utterly ordinary. It produced about 100 horsepower in twin carburetor form, which meant it wasn't a sports car by any stretch. But what set this motor apart was its overbuilt nature. Thick cylinder walls, a crankshaft that could take abuse far beyond its rated output, and a bottom end designed with a margin of strength so vast that mechanics used to joke Volvo must have been designing engines for tractors and simply dropped them into cars. By the late 1960s, Volvo upgraded the Amazon with the B20 engine, a 2.0-liter evolution that retained all of the indestructible qualities of the B18 while adding a touch more power and torque. These engines quickly earned a reputation not just for running reliably for hundreds of thousands of miles, but for being almost impossible to kill. Mechanics across Europe and America would tell stories of Amazons that ran dry of oil, yet somehow kept going for days, coughing and clattering, but still moving, as if powered by stubbornness as much as gasoline. The 122S didn't just survive, it thrived in harsh conditions. In Sweden and the rest of Scandinavia, where long winters, salted roads, and icy conditions tested the limits of any machine, the Amazon became a trusted companion. Families depended on them to start in sub-zero weather, haul kids, luggage, or farm equipment, and endure roads that were often little more than rutted tracks. In America, the Amazon became a cult classic among professors, intellectuals, and those who wanted something different from the tail-finned excess of Detroit iron. Owners quickly discovered that the car's simplicity was its greatest strength. There was nothing superfluous, no fragile luxury gimmicks, no engineering fads. Everything was functional, straightforward, and built with the assumption that it would need to last decades. Car magazines in the 1960s didn't know quite how to categorize the Amazon. It wasn't flashy, fast, or glamorous, yet reviewers couldn't help but admire it. Road and Track called it a car that feels like it could have been hewn from a single block of steel, praising its robust build quality, balanced handling, and the surprising satisfaction of wringing out the little four-cylinder on winding roads. The Amazon was no performance machine, but it could hustle. Its unibody design gave it rigidity, and its suspension tuning, while conservative, offered stability and predictability at a time when many small cars felt twitchy or unsafe at higher speeds. The car also became a surprising star in rallying. Stripped-down, race-prepped 122s took on some of the toughest endurance rallies of the 1960s, from the Monte Carlo to the East African Safari Rally,
often finishing high in the rankings and shocking rivals who had underestimated the boring Volvo. These victories cemented the car's reputation not just as tough, but as a genuine competitor when pushed to the limit. For everyday owners, though, the 122S was less about speed and more about trust. It became the car you could rely on through thick and thin. Countless stories from original owners tell the same tale. Amazons passing 500,000 miles on the original engine, surviving multiple accidents with their occupants unscathed thanks to Volvo's early focus on safety, or being parked in barns for decades only to fire right back up with fresh gas and a new battery. One old mechanic in Sweden once quipped, "The Amazon will rust away before it wears out." And he wasn't entirely wrong. The bodywork could succumb to salt if neglected, but the mechanicals were practically eternal. By 1966, the 122S had already earned its stripes as a family car, a rally warrior, and a symbol of Swedish engineering integrity. Volvo even emphasized its safety credentials, as the Amazon was one of the very first cars in the world to come standard with front seatbelts, a feature that most Americans shrugged off in the mid-60s, but which hinted at Volvo's future reputation as a leader in automotive safety. For Volvo, the Amazon became the bridge between their post-war image as a quirky Scandinavian manufacturer and their later identity as a global brand synonymous with safety, reliability, and durability. Today, the 1966 Volvo 122S is remembered not for flash or glory, but for what it represents, the car as a companion for life. While other classics of the 1960s are remembered for horsepower numbers or quarter-mile times, the Amazon is remembered for being the car that simply never quit, that carried families across continents, that built a reputation so strong that even now, decades later, people recall it as one of the most trustworthy cars ever made. To enthusiasts, it's a reminder that greatness in automobiles doesn't always come from speed or glamour. Sometimes it comes from endurance, loyalty, and a kind of mechanical honesty that modern cars rarely achieve. Would you like me to expand this into an even longer book chapter-style story that mixes in specific owner anecdotes, rally race accounts, and period test data so it reads like a historical deep dive into why the Amazon was both beloved and unkillable?
The 1957 Chevrolet is one of the most iconic American cars ever built, forever etched into popular memory as the gleaming, chrome-clad Bel Air with tail fins, pastel paint, and a V8 rumbling under the hood. But behind the spotlight of the Tri-5 Chevy's glamorous image lies a far less celebrated variant, the ones equipped not with the flashy small-block V8, but with Chevrolet's tried-and-true 235 cubic-inch Blue Flame inline 6. These weren't the cars you saw in hot rod magazines or Saturday night drag races. These were the workhorses, the backbone of America's small towns, farms, and city streets. While the V8 Bel Airs became icons of style and speed, the six-cylinder 210s and Bel Airs quietly earned a reputation for durability so legendary that many were still in service decades after newer, fancier cars had long since rotted away in junkyards. The 235 straight six was already a proven design by 1957. Chevrolet had been refining this engine since the 1930s, and by the time it powered the Tri-5 Chevys, it was nearly bulletproof. It wasn't glamorous, making around 140 horsepower in 1957. It was a far cry from the fire-breathing, fuel-injected 283 V8s that made headlines, but what it lacked in power, it more than made up for in ruggedness. Its cast-iron block and head, simple valve train, and overbuilt internals meant it could take abuse that would kill most engines. Farmers, fleet managers, and even small-town sheriffs knew this well. The 235 might not win you a race, but it would start every morning, haul heavy loads, idle all day without complaint, and shrug off years of neglect. Taxi companies in particular adored the six-cylinder 57s. In cities across America, fleets of these Chevrolets clocked up astronomical mileage, often running 24 hours a day with nothing more than oil changes, brake jobs, and the occasional clutch replacement. Mechanics who worked on them often said the engines ran forever, even when you didn't want them to.
Stories abound of 235-powered Chevys passing 300,000 miles in an era when 100,000 was considered the end of a car's life. One New York cabbie recalled driving the same six-cylinder Chevy for nearly 15 years, claiming the only reason he gave it up was because the city finally mandated newer vehicles, not because the car had failed him. Out on rural farms, the six-cylinder 57s became indispensable tools. Farmers appreciated that the engines tolerated dirty fuel, infrequent oil changes, and cold starts in brutal winters. The cars often doubled as trucks, loaded down with feed, tools, or fence posts, bouncing along muddy tracks that would terrify the chrome-trimmed V8 Boulevard cruisers. More than one farmer joked that the Chevy 6 ran on spite and dust because it seemed unstoppable no matter what was thrown at it. In fact, many 57 sedans with 6s ended their lives not in junkyards, but out in fields, still running, converted into farm beaters or makeshift tractors well into the 1970s and 80s. Even in law enforcement, where pursuit power was often prized, small-town sheriffs in rural areas stuck with the six-cylinder cars. They knew they weren't going to be chasing down hot rodders at 110 miles an hour, but they needed a car that could idle at the edge of town for hours, start instantly when called upon, and keep running no matter how poor the county's maintenance budget was. In that role, the 235 was unmatched. There are accounts of police departments in the South and Midwest keeping six-cylinder Chevys in service for 20 years or more, repainting them a dozen times, swapping out seats, patching rust, but never once replacing the engine. While enthusiasts today celebrate the 1957 Chevy Bel Air for its style and the V8 under its hood, those who lived with the six-cylinder versions often remember them even more fondly. They didn't have the glamour, but they had the grit. One retired farmer put it best: everyone wanted the V8 Bel Air, but the six-cylinder is what kept America running. The V8s are in museums now. My old 6 is still parked out back, and if I put a battery in it, I bet it'll start. The irony is that the humble six-cylinder 210s and Bel Air sedans were far more common on the road in 1957 than the now legendary V8 models. They were affordable, dependable, and practical. The cars chosen by families who needed transportation, not flash. Today, collectors pay fortunes for pristine V8 Bel Air convertibles, while the six-cylinder sedans are often overlooked. Yet in terms of cultural impact, longevity, and sheer service to everyday Americans, the 235-powered 57 Chevy might be the true hero of the Tri-5 era. Would you like me to make an even longer version that digs into specific fleet use stories, tales of rural families keeping them alive into the 1990s, and how the 235 Blue Flame earned its indestructible reputation across multiple generations of Chevrolets? That way it becomes more of a living oral history of these forgotten six-cylinder workhorses.
The 1969 Mercedes-Benz 220D, part of the W115 generation, is one of those rare cars that transcended its role as mere transportation and instead became a global institution. To call it slow is an understatement bordering on comedy. This was a car that could take nearly half a minute to reach 60 miles per hour, and on a good day, downhill with a tailwind, it might creep toward 80. Yet none of that mattered. What mattered was that the 220D's little diesel four-cylinder, the OM615, was one of the toughest, longest-lived engines ever put into an automobile. In an era when most cars struggled to last beyond 100,000 miles before needing major work, the 220D quietly, stubbornly, and almost defiantly rewrote the rules. Million-mile examples were not myths, but commonplace. It was the car you could drive for decades, hand down to your children, and still expect it to run with nothing more than basic upkeep. Mercedes never sold the 220D as a performance car. They sold it as an unbreakable one. Taxi operators from Germany to Greece, from Cairo to Cape Town, bought fleets of them, knowing that the little diesel would outlast not only the drivers, but sometimes the companies themselves. In places like Beirut, Lagos, and Nairobi, the 220D became a rolling constant. Painted in taxi yellow or battered white, seats covered with woven mats to hide years of wear, odometers long since broken, but engines still clattering happily.
The sound of the 220D's diesel was part of the atmosphere in cities across 3 continents, a rhythmic mechanical heartbeat that told you, this car will be here tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. The OM615 engine displaced just 2.2 liters, making about 60 horsepower in the 220D, which by any measure was pitiful for such a solidly built sedan. But that lack of power was also a key to its durability. The engine was understressed, designed with margins of safety and robustness that bordered on overkill. Heavy crankshafts, thick cylinder walls, and a conservative fuel injection system meant that even with poor quality diesel fuel, lack of regular oil changes, or searing heat, the motor would keep running. In Africa, it became common wisdom that if you had a Mercedes 220D and a jerrycan of fuel, you could cross entire countries without worrying about breakdowns. Owners joked that the 220D would happily run on cooking oil, and in some desperate situations, they weren't really joking. The car's slowness became part of its personality. Journalists at the time mocked its acceleration, with one road test famously quipping that, by the time the 220D reaches highway speed, the driver has already considered another career. Yet even reviewers had to admit that once the car was up to cruising speed, it could maintain it all day, mile after mile, with a solidity and comfort that made it feel indestructible. Mercedes engineering gave the W115 excellent suspension tuning and unibody strength, so even on rough roads or dirt tracks, it felt composed. Drivers who spent their entire careers behind the wheel of a 220D often commented that while the car was never quick, it was never tiring either, a trait that mattered far more in a working vehicle. Stories of these cars' longevity are endless. There are well-documented accounts of 220Ds crossing the million-mile mark with their original engines, transmissions, and rear ends still intact. In Greece, one taxi driver famously logged more than 2.8 million kilometers, 1.7 million miles in his W115, earning a place in Mercedes lore. In Africa, some cars served through multiple wars and upheavals, patched together with wire, tin, or whatever was available, but still running. In the Middle East, where conditions could be brutal, the 220D became a symbol of reliability, the car that could be trusted to carry a family through desert heat when everything else failed. Even decades later, into the 1980s, 1990s, and beyond, it wasn't unusual to find W115 220Ds still running daily in developing countries, long after their paint had faded, their chrome had dulled, and their seats had collapsed into springs. Mechanics loved them because they were simple, forgiving, and required only basic tools to keep alive. Owners loved them because they never left you stranded. And passengers loved them because no matter how battered, the ride quality was still smoother than most modern cars. Today, when enthusiasts think of Mercedes-Benz, they often remember the glamour of the SL Roadsters or the prestige of the big S-Class sedans. But for millions of people across the world, the name Mercedes will forever conjure up the humble 220D, its diesel clatter echoing through city streets or country roads, its odometer spinning endlessly, its legend growing with every mile. It wasn't stylish, it wasn't fast, but it was immortal. And in many ways, that made it the greatest Mercedes of them all. Would you like me to stretch this into an even longer narrative, almost like a documentary script, weaving in personal anecdotes from former taxi drivers, specific records of million-mile cars, and comparisons to rival taxis of the era like the Peugeot 404 or 504. That way it reads less like a summary and more like a sweeping historical portrait of the 220D as a cultural icon.
The 1964 Plymouth Valiant, equipped with Chrysler's legendary Slant 6, is one of those cars that quietly defined reliability in America. Not through glamour or raw performance, but through sheer, stubborn refusal to die. While muscle cars like the GTO or Mustang stole headlines and flashy ads, and luxury machines from GM or Ford promised chrome and comfort, the Valiant was something entirely different. Honest, durable transportation. It was the car your father bought new, drove for 15 years, then handed down to you when you needed to get to college or work.
And when you were done with it, chances are you could pass it on again, because as long as it had oil in the crankcase, and sometimes even when it didn't, the Slant 6 under the hood would still fire up and run like it always had. The Slant 6, introduced in 1960, was an engineering marvel disguised as a humble workhorse. Its unique 30-degree inclined cylinder layout wasn't just for show. It allowed for a lower hood line and a longer intake manifold, which gave the little straight six exceptional breathing. In 1964, the Valiant typically carried either the 170 or 225 cubic inch version. Neither would win drag races with horsepower ratings in the 101 to 145 range, but what mattered was how they were built. The block was over-engineered, the crankshaft was robust, and tolerances were generous enough that these engines could run under extreme neglect without self-destructing. Many mechanics used to joke that Chrysler built the Slant 6 with tractor-level durability in mind. What gave the 1964 Valiant its reputation wasn't just its engine, it was the way the entire package came together. It was small by American standards of the day, but not tiny, making it maneuverable in cities, yet practical for families. Farmers especially loved them because the Valiant was cheap to buy, cheap to fix, and tough enough to bounce across unpaved roads with tools, feed, or hay stuffed in the trunk and back seat. It wasn't uncommon to see a Valiant parked next to a tractor in a barn, covered in dust but still running, waiting for the next round of duty. There are endless stories of Slant 6 Valiants outlasting everything else around them. Families would run them until the bodies were rusted through, floorboards gone, fenders held together with wire or duct tape, yet the engine would idle like a sewing machine. In rural America, it was common to retire a rusted-out Valiant from road use and keep it as a farm car, running around fields, hauling wood, or pulling wagons. Some were even adapted into makeshift pickup trucks after their bodies rotted away because it was easier to cut the car apart than to kill the motor. The Slant 6 also had a reputation for surviving outright abuse. Stories circulated of engines run for hours with no coolant, or oil drained out as a test, and still refusing to seize. Chrysler itself once famously ran a Slant 6 at wide-open throttle for hundreds of hours on a dynamometer just to prove its durability. Owners learned quickly that while the paint might fade, the seats might collapse, and the transmission might eventually give up, the Slant 6 would just keep going. Car magazines of the day didn't give the Valiant much attention because it wasn't glamorous. But when they did test it, they noted the smoothness of the six-cylinder, the economy, 20-plus mpg when driven gently, and the simplicity of maintenance. It wasn't a car to brag about, but it was a car you could depend on, and that was often worth more than horsepower. By the late 1960s, muscle cars dominated American culture, but in the background, the humble Valiant with its indestructible Slant 6 kept families, students, farmers, and working-class people moving. It was the car you could always count on to start on a freezing morning, the car you didn't worry about loaning to a reckless teenager, the car that seemed immune to the mechanical disasters that plagued flashier machines. Today, collectors still hunt for a 1964 Valiant, not because they're rare or valuable, but because they represent something pure and honest in American car history. Ask an old mechanic, and he'll probably have a story of one that ran half a mile with nothing more than spark plugs, belts, and oil changes. Ask an old farmer, and he might tell you about the Valiant that finally rusted into the earth, but whose engine he pulled and stuck into a water pump or generator, where it kept running for another 20 years. The 1964 Plymouth Valiant with the Slant 6 wasn't flashy, but it was immortal. It was a car that could take neglect, abuse, and endless use, and just keep rolling. It may not have been the car kids dreamed about, but for countless families across America, it was the car that never let them down. Would you like me to expand this into an even longer portrait with real-life anecdotes of Valiant's surviving decades of use, famous endurance tests of the Slant 6, and cultural comparisons to other indestructible engines like Volvo's B18 and Mercedes' OM615? That would turn it into a true epic of mechanical immortality.
The 1955 Ford Customline with the 223 cubic inch inline six is one of those quiet legends of American motoring that never tried to draw attention to itself, but managed to outlive flashier, faster, and more glamorous machines simply by being honest and unbreakable. In the mid-1950s, when the car culture was exploding with chrome-laden cruisers, tail fins, and a new obsession with horsepower, the Customline stood almost defiantly modest. It was the middle-class Ford, positioned between the bare-bones mainline and the dressier Fairline, a car meant for people who wanted something new and solid without all the unnecessary frills. In a way, it was a perfect reflection of America's working backbone, reliable, sturdy, and built to endure whatever life threw at it. At the heart of this endurance story was the 223 cubic inch mileage maker inline six. By 1955, Ford had already proven the worth of this engine, which had debuted a few years earlier. It wasn't designed to win races or impress neighbors with a throaty exhaust note. It was designed to outlast just about anything. With its forged steel crankshaft, rugged block, and conservative compression ratio, it could handle neglect like few engines could. The 223 was a motor that didn't care if you missed an oil change, didn't mind if it was asked to run all day at low speeds delivering mail or taxi passengers, and tolerated abuse that would have destroyed lighter, more temperamental engines. Its 120 horsepower wasn't much, but it had plenty of torque down low, which made the car feel stronger than the numbers suggested. The Customline itself was offered in 2- and 4-door sedans, hardtops, and wagons, and many 6-cylinder examples were bought by families who didn't care about speed but wanted a car they could rely on through harsh winters and endless road trips. It quickly gained a reputation as a machine that simply never died. Taxi companies ran them for years, racking up 200,000 or more miles before finally retiring them, often because the bodies had rusted beyond repair, not because the engines gave up. Small-town police departments also ordered fleets of 6-cylinder Customlines, especially in rural areas where budgets were tight and performance pursuits were rare. Officers joked that while they couldn't catch the fastest criminals, the cars never stranded them on lonely backroads at night. What's remarkable is how often these cars lived on long after their original owners had moved on. By the 1960s and 1970s, countless old Customlines became second-hand workhorses for farmers, mechanics, and teenagers. Farmers especially loved them. Stories abound of Customlines parked next to barns for months, even years, then fired up without much more than a fresh battery and some gas. They were pressed into service hauling tools, pulling small trailers, or just bouncing across fields to deliver lunch to workers. Mechanics loved them because they were simple. No finicky carburetors to constantly tune, no complicated wiring, and just enough parts compatibility with trucks that spares were never too far away. Teenagers, on the other hand, saw them as cheap first cars. Many were beat up, dented, and already decades old by the time they hit high school parking lots in the 1970s, but they ran. You could stall them, over-rev them, grind every gear in the 3-on-the-tree column shifter, and still the 223 would keep pulling. For some young hot rodders, the 223 became a kind of underground challenge. While the V8 guys sneered, there were kids who bolted on dual carburetors, fabricated headers, and even ran these sixes down drag strips. They weren't champions, but they earned respect for being indestructible. One owner once recalled, "I tried to blow it up. Neutral drops, revving until the valves floated, running without oil for almost an hour. That motor refused to die. I gave up before it did." By the time the 1980s rolled around, many of these cars were a little more than field relics. The frames and bodies rusted, the interiors were sun-baked and mouse-eaten, but if you turned the key, often the engine would cough, sputter, and then settle into that unmistakable tractor-like idle. In fact, mechanics who specialized in old Fords used to say that the 223 was the sort of motor that would still be running after a nuclear war. Its slow, deliberate, under-stress design gave it a kind of immortality. There's also something deeply nostalgic about how these cars fit into everyday American life. They weren't cars you saw in movies or on billboards. They were cars in yearbook photos, parked outside high school gyms, They were cars that carried entire families to national parks in the summer, cars that drove newlyweds away from small-town churches, cars that brought babies home from the hospital and then decades later carried those same kids to their first jobs. The Customline was woven into the fabric of American life in a way that glamorous cars never were. A retired mechanic once put it best: the V8s were the stars, but the 6s were the survivors. I saw Customlines with over 300,000 miles, running strong. You didn't brag about owning one, but you also didn't worry when you turned the key. Another farmer remembered his 1955. The body gave up, the seats collapsed, the paint peeled, but that old 6 just kept on ticking. I finally sold it to a neighbor's kid for $50, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's still running. Today, collectors rarely seek out the 6-cylinder Customlines. They want the V8s, the convertibles, the flashy chrome. But in many ways, the 6-cylinder sedans are the true survivors, the ones that lived real lives and told real stories. They're the cars that kept America moving quietly, without fanfare, through decades of change. To find one today, still running with its original 223 humming under the hood, is to touch a piece of living history. A reminder of a time when cars weren't about showing off, but about serving faithfully, year after year, long after the world had forgotten them. Would you like me to expand this even further by weaving in specific anecdotes about old 223-powered Customlines still running into the 1990s and 2000s, and how some collectors are finally beginning to see their value as working-class survivors?
The 1967 Toyota Land Cruiser FJ40 is one of those rare vehicles that transcended its original purpose and became something far greater than just another off-road truck. To call it indestructible is almost an understatement. This was a machine that seemed engineered not for suburban driveways or Sunday outings, but for survival itself. A vehicle that could withstand abuse in conditions where everything else, Jeeps, Land Rovers, and pickup trucks, eventually broke down. In the 1960s, when Toyota was still building its reputation in the US market, the FJ40 served as the ultimate statement of durability, a truck that would willingly climb, crawl, and slog its way through terrain that left others stranded, and then keep on going without complaint for decades. The 1967 model came at the heart of the FJ40's prime years. Its boxy, upright stance, slab-sided body, and simple removable hardtop or soft-top configuration made it instantly recognizable. Unlike the chrome-heavy, style-obsessed American cars of the era, the FJ40 had all the elegance of a Hammer: basic, tough, and unapologetically functional. And under its no-nonsense steel body was a powertrain built for punishment. The heart was Toyota's F-Series inline 6, a big 3.9-liter engine producing around 125 horsepower and a mountain of low-end torque. It wasn't fast, but it was geared to crawl over rocks, haul heavy loads, and idle all day in blistering heat without breaking a sweat. Owners quickly discovered that the F-Series engine had a kind of agricultural resilience. It could tolerate dirty fuel, missed oil changes, overheating, and brutal neglect. In rural parts of Africa, Asia, South America, and the Middle East, stories circulated of FJ40s that had run for years without major service. Soldiers in Vietnam swore by them, claiming that while American Jeeps broke axles or electrical systems in the mud and humidity, the FJ40s just kept grinding along. Explorers and aid workers in Africa learned the same lesson. If you needed to cross the Sahara or trek through the Congo, the Land Cruiser was the only companion you could trust to make it there and back again. By 1967, the Land Cruiser had also become a cult hero among ranchers and farmers in the United States, particularly in the rugged West. Cowboys, hunters, and forest workers put them to work on ranches and logging trails, where they carried supplies, pulled trailers, and crossed terrain where no pickup could go. Rust was the great enemy of the FJ40. Those thin steel bodies dissolved quickly in salty or humid climates, but the mechanicals underneath refused to die. It wasn't unusual to see an FJ40 with rotted fenders and gaping holes in the floorboards still running flawlessly, its six-cylinder humming away and its 4WD system pulling it through mud and snow as if it were new. Driving one was an experience in itself. The steering was heavy and vague, the ride stiff, and the cabin Spartan,
Little more than a flat dash with a few gauges and a metal floor you could hose out. But behind the wheel, you felt a confidence that no other vehicle of the era could match. The FJ40 didn't need to prove itself with speed or comfort. Its proof was in the way it climbed over boulders, forded rivers, and slogged through sand with calm determination. As one rancher once put it, it'll rattle your teeth out on pavement, but when you're 20 miles from the nearest road, it's the only thing that'll get you home. The cultural impact of the FJ40 is hard to overstate. For many in remote regions, it was the first motor vehicle they had ever seen, a tool that opened up access to villages, farms, and wilderness areas, previously reachable only by foot or mule. Governments adopted them for military and police use, aid organizations used them for relief work, and adventurers chose them as the backbone of expeditions. A 1967 FJ40 wasn't a luxury, it was survival equipment. And it wasn't uncommon to see them decades later, patched together with welding, wire, and homemade parts, still running strong long after newer trucks had collapsed. One veteran mechanic from Kenya once said, "You can throw an FJ40 off a cliff, drag it out, fill it with diesel by mistake, and it'll still get you to the next town." Another owner in South America recalled abandoning his 67 in the jungle after an accident, only to find it still there, running, when he returned nearly 10 years later. In many parts of the world, they became heirlooms, passed from father to son, because everyone knew they were too valuable and too dependable to ever let go. Today, the 1967 Toyota Land Cruiser FJ40 is highly collectible, with restored examples commanding staggering prices at auctions. But the true soul of the FJ40 isn't in polished restorations. It's in the battered, sun-bleached survivors still running in remote corners of the world, proving that Toyota's reputation for toughness wasn't built in ad campaigns, but in deserts, jungles, and mountains where nothing else survived. It was never glamorous, but it was immortal. Would you like me to make this even longer by expanding on the FJ40's role in Vietnam, the Middle East oil fields, and its impact on Toyota's rise in America, turning it into a complete saga of how this truck became a global survival icon?
The 1963 Volkswagen Beetle is more than just an iconic car. It's a symbol of resilience, simplicity, and practicality that transcends generations. While other cars of the early 1960s relied on increasingly complex mechanical systems, heavy steel frames, and delicate electrical components, the Beetle thrived on minimalism and mechanical honesty. Its air-cooled, rear-mounted flat-4 engine, producing just under 50 horsepower in 1963, was never about speed, glamour, or luxury. It was about surviving the real world. And survive it did. From the sun-baked deserts of the American Southwest to the snowy passes of the Alps, Beetles proved time and again that they were nearly indestructible, capable of carrying families, students, and adventurers across terrain that would immobilize far more powerful machines. The genius of the Beetle lay in its simplicity. The engine was air-cooled, meaning it had no radiator to freeze in winter or boil over in summer. Its rear-mounted design gave it excellent traction on slippery roads, and its torsion bar suspension absorbed bumps better than many contemporary setups. Mechanics and owners quickly realized that maintaining a Beetle was almost laughably easy. You didn't need a full garage or a toolbox full of specialty wrenches. Just a screwdriver, pliers, and basic ingenuity could keep the car running for decades. Leaks, flat tires, minor electrical issues, or even seized pistons could be addressed by someone with no formal training. In many ways, it was a car built for self-reliance, for a world where a breakdown didn't mean you were stranded permanently. The 1963 model benefited from years of refinement since the Beetle's introduction. Volkswagen engineers had ironed out many early reliability issues, making the car even more robust. The engine, a 1.2-liter flat-4, was simple but extraordinarily durable. Parts were abundant, inexpensive, and interchangeable, which meant that repairs could be made on the fly almost anywhere. Families, travelers, and even adventurers discovered that they could push a Beetle to its limits, haul it through sand dunes, navigate mountain passes, forge shallow rivers, and the little engine would always respond. Stories abound of Beetles driven thousands of miles across continents with nothing more than routine maintenance, surviving abuse that would destroy more sophisticated European cars of the same era. Its compact size, lightweight, and nimble handling made it the perfect car for narrow, winding roads, urban centers, and rural tracks alike. Drivers loved it because it felt predictable and safe in almost any condition. It was slow compared to American sedans, but that slowness was part of its charm. It encouraged steady, careful driving, which in turn preserved the car's longevity. Enthusiasts often joke that while a Beetle couldn't outrun a Mustang, it could outlast one. Its air-cooled engine, simple wiring, and minimalist construction meant fewer points of failure, and in harsh environments, that was everything. The Beetle's durability was legendary across the globe. In South America, Beetles were modified into taxis and delivery vehicles that ran for hundreds of thousands of miles. In Africa, they carried families across deserts and savannas, often without access to gasoline stations or repair shops. In Europe, they survived winters of snow and salt, proving that a car didn't need a massive V8 or all-wheel drive to conquer the elements. It just needed reliable engineering and an owner who understood it. Even decades later, Beetles from the early 1960s still appear on the roads. Classic car collectors prize them, but the truth is that many of the survivors are not pristine restorations. They are rusted, dented, and patched together reminders of the original car's resilience. People find them in barns, under carports, or even still in daily service in parts of the world where the climate and roads would have killed lesser cars long ago. They start with a turn of the key, and they keep going. The 1963 Volkswagen Beetle represents a philosophy of motoring that has become increasingly rare: simplicity, reliability, and adaptability over flashy design, speed, or luxury. It's a car that doesn't demand admiration, it earns respect. For millions of drivers around the world, the Beetle was, and often still is, the ultimate survivor. It could take abuse, endure neglect, and cross impossible terrain, all while returning its occupants safely home. In the world of automobiles, few vehicles can claim such consistent, global, and lasting reliability. The Beetle wasn't just a car, it was nearly immortal. I can expand this further into a much longer narrative-style history, including real stories of 1960s Beetles crossing deserts, mountains, and even being used in wartime and expedition scenarios, showing how their simplicity and toughness made them a legend. Do you want me to do that?
The 1958 Pontiac Chieftain with the 370 cubic inch V8 is one of those rare cars that manages to earn a reputation for longevity and durability without ever being flashy or ostentatious. While Pontiac's higher-end models like the Star Chief and Bonneville were the stars of the lineup, drawing attention with chrome trim, two-tone paint, and marketing slogans that promised speed and prestige, the Chieftain quietly became the backbone of American driving in the late 1950s. Families, small business owners, and farmers chose the Chieftain for its balance of practicality, performance, and, above all, dependability, a choice that, in hindsight, has proven timeless. The 370 V8 was the beating heart of this reliability, a powerhouse built not only to move the car efficiently, but to withstand decades of use, abuse, and neglect. The 370 cubic inch V8 was part of Pontiac's early wide-track engine series, designed to complement the new chassis architecture that widened the car's stance for improved handling. Rated at roughly 290 horsepower from the factory, the engine's numbers might seem modest compared to later muscle cars, but what it lacked in raw, headline-grabbing output, it made up for in torque, robustness, and mechanical integrity. The block itself was exceptionally thick, the crankshaft heavy, and internal tolerances generous. In other words, the engine was overbuilt, practically begging to be abused, neglected, or simply ignored for years at a time, yet it would still fire up and run with remarkable reliability. This is why so many barn-find Chieftains, some untouched since the early 1970s, can still be started, driven, and even raced with minimal intervention. The Chieftain wasn't just about a tough engine, it was a complete package designed for real-world use. Its suspension, though not sporty, was forgiving, durable, and capable of handling rough country roads, gravel drives, and winter conditions without suffering catastrophic failure. Brakes and steering were simple and mechanical, easily repairable with common tools, and much easier to maintain than the growingly complex electrical and hydraulic systems found in competing cars of the era. In combination with the 370 V8, the Chieftain could tow light trailers, carry heavy cargo, and transport families long distances with confidence. It was not a car built for racing, but in the hands of a careful or even creative driver, it could surprise faster cars simply through endurance. The legacy of the 370 V8 is built as much on anecdotal evidence as factory specs. Farmers, small-town mechanics, and taxi operators all reported Chieftains running strong after hundreds of thousands of miles. One well-known story from a Wisconsin barn tells of a 1958 Chieftain that sat idle for nearly 30 years. When it was finally rediscovered, the engine turned over with a few cranks, idled, and ran smoothly after a simple service and fresh fuel. Similar accounts appear across the Midwest and even in southern states, where rust often claimed body panels long before the 370 V8 gave up. It became almost a legend among mechanics and enthusiasts. The Chieftain could be neglected, parked, even partially disassembled, and yet its engine would defy expectation and run again decades later. Even in day-to-day service, the Chieftain demonstrated remarkable reliability. Suburban families used it as their primary car, driving it to work, school, and grocery stores, often racking up enormous mileage in the process. In small towns and rural areas, the Chieftain became a practical tool. Farmers drove them across fields, ranchers loaded them with feed and tools, and small business owners used them for deliveries. It was common for a single car to be passed from one family member to another, or sold multiple times, and each new owner would marvel at how well the engine continued to perform. Unlike more temperamental V8s of the era, which demanded constant attention and careful maintenance, the 370 V8 rewarded owners for simple care and refused to fail catastrophically. This inductibility extended into the collector era as well. Today, enthusiasts searching for authentic 1958 Chieftains are often surprised at how many barn finds still exist with engines that turn over and run. Restoration often focuses on bodywork, upholstery, and paint, because the mechanicals, particularly the 370 V8, remain remarkably intact. This overbuilt quality has cemented the Chieftain's reputation as a working-class classic, a car whose historical importance comes not from flash or rarity, but from years of practical service and mechanical reliability. Perhaps most importantly, the Chieftain embodies a philosophy of car building that is increasingly rare in today's market: durability over showmanship. While it wasn't flashy, it didn't need to be. Its value came from performance under real conditions, endurance through decades, and the quiet knowledge that it could survive neglect, abuse, and hard use. For generations of Americans, the 1958 Pontiac Chieftain with the 370 V8 was more than a car. It was a companion, a tool, and a symbol of reliability. Its thick engine block, simple mechanical systems, and understated design allowed it to outlast competitors and outlive many of its owners, becoming a living testament to Pontiac's commitment to build engines and vehicles that could endure. By the 1980s and 1990s, as collectors began rediscovering mid-century Pontiacs, the Chieftain's reputation for reliability only grew.
Stories of 40, 50, and even 60-year-old engines firing to life after decades of sitting quietly in barns circulated widely in automotive circles, reinforcing the idea that these cars were built to last a lifetime and beyond. It wasn't the car you bought to impress the neighbors or dominate the strip. It was the car you bought to survive, to serve, and to keep running when everything else failed. In that sense, the 1958 Pontiac Chieftain with the 370 V8 wasn't just a durable vehicle. It was an almost immortal monument to mid-century American engineering, a car whose heart still beats in barns, driveways, and back roads across the country today. If you like, I can make this even longer and more immersive, adding personal stories of multiple barn-find chieftains, accounts from mechanics who restored long-forgotten engines, and comparisons to other legendary durable engines like the Chrysler 392 Hemi and Chevy 265 small block, creating a full epic of the 370 V8's near-mythical endurance. Do you want me to do that?
The 1965 Dodge Dart, equipped with Chrysler's legendary Slant 6, is one of those cars that built its reputation not through style, flash, or raw speed, but through an almost supernatural ability to survive abuse, neglect, and decades of use. In an era when Detroit was obsessed with horsepower wars and flashy chrome, the Dart quietly became the backbone of reliable, everyday transportation for families, students, and workers alike. It wasn't the car you dreamed of showing off, but it was the car you could count on to keep going when every other vehicle around you broke down. Its simplicity, solid engineering, and the indestructible Slant 6 under the hood made it a modern legend of endurance. A machine that could be driven hard, left neglected, or pushed to extreme mileage without ever quitting. The Slant 6 engine, officially known as Chrysler's 225 cubic inch inline 6, was a masterpiece of practical engineering. Chrysler mounted the cylinders at a 30-degree angle, lowering the engine's profile for better hood clearance and allowing for a longer intake manifold, which improved airflow and performance. With a conservative compression ratio and overbuilt internal components, the engine produced reliable torque without demanding constant attention or maintenance. It was officially rated at roughly 145 horsepower, but the real magic of the Slant 6 wasn't in speed, it was in its ability to shrug off abuse and keep going. Mechanics and owners alike quickly discovered that it could survive running with low oil, extended idling, extreme heat, and heavy loads, all without catastrophic failure. The Dart itself was a nonsense, compact to mid-sized car, making it perfect for both urban and rural life. Its suspension was simple but durable, capable of handling potholes, gravel roads, and farm tracks without falling apart. Steering and brakes were straightforward, easy to repair, and remarkably reliable for the era. Drivers quickly learned that the Dart, especially with the Slant 6, wasn't just a car. It was a tool built to last, something that could carry groceries, college students, or work tools for hundreds of thousands of miles without complaint. Farmers loved them for this reason. The Dart could haul produce, tow light loads, and survive years of rough, dusty roads, yet still start every morning. College students appreciated them for different reasons: cheap, simple, and able to endure whatever abuse their youthful drivers could throw at them. The reputation of the Slant 6 was bolstered by real-world endurance stories. Owners frequently reported reaching 200,000 or even 250,000 miles on the original engine without ever rebuilding it. There are countless tales of Darts parked in barns for years, yet starting up almost immediately when coaxed back to life. One mechanic recalled a customer who had driven the same Dart for 18 years through snow, mud, and endless commuting, and the engine hadn't even needed a valve adjustment. The Slant 6 seemed to defy time itself. It tolerated neglect, abuse, and extreme conditions with a stoicism that almost no other engine of the era could match. The Dart wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't fast compared to the muscle cars gaining fame in the mid-1960s, but in practical terms, it was one of the most impressive machines on the road. Its economy was decent for the time, its parts were plentiful, and its simple design allowed even amateur mechanics to keep it running. In many ways, the Dart Slant 6 embodied a philosophy of car building that has almost disappeared today. Durability over showmanship, practicality over flash, and engineering designed to survive real life rather than impress in magazines. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, many original Darts were still on the road, some carrying third-generation owners, some transformed into farm vehicles, and some even serving as cheap commuter cars in cities across the US. Even when bodies rusted and interiors fell apart, the engine and drivetrain remained astonishingly robust. Stories circulated in automotive circles of Slant 6 engines being transplanted into trucks, vans, and other vehicles because the engine itself was worth far more than the car it came from. It became clear that Chrysler had built not just an engine, but a legend, a mechanical heart that could outlast everything around it. The 1965 Dodge Dart Slant 6 may never have been celebrated in car magazines or idolized in muscle car culture, but for those who experienced its durability firsthand, it was nothing short of miraculous. It was a car that could be abused, neglected, and pushed to extreme mileage, and yet start, drive, and endure. Farmers swore by it, students abused it, and families depended on it. It was modest, unassuming, and brutally reliable. The kind of car that, in its quiet way, earned a kind of immortality. If you like, I can expand this into an even longer, epic narrative, including first-hand accounts from owners who ran Darts with over 300,000 miles, transplant stories of Slant 6 engines surviving multiple vehicles, and comparisons with other legendary indestructible engines like the Volvo B18, Mercedes OM615, and Ford 223i6, turning it into a full saga of mechanical immortality. Do you want me to do that? The 1962 Checker Marathon is one of those rare vehicles whose fame didn't come from sleek lines, racing pedigrees, or luxurious interiors, but from an almost mythical reputation for durability and endurance. While Detroit was producing increasingly stylish and comfortable sedans in the early 1960s, Checker Motors had a singular mission: to build the ultimate taxi, a car that could endure the brutal, unrelenting abuse of city life in New York and other major urban centers. The Marathon's purpose was not to turn heads or win awards. It was to survive every imaginable strain that 24/7 operation could throw at it, and in that, it succeeded to an almost unbelievable degree. Underneath its boxy, utilitarian exterior, the Checker Marathon was engineered to withstand decades of nonstop use. Its body-on-frame construction was overbuilt, with steel thick enough to shrug off minor collisions that would ruin lesser cars. The suspension was heavy-duty, designed to absorb the constant pounding of potholes, curbs, and uneven roads. Steering and brakes were simple, reliable, and easily repaired, while engines, most commonly straight sixes and later small block V8s, were robust and virtually bulletproof. Mechanics who worked on these cars swore by their simplicity. There were no complex electronics, no delicate components, no frills that could fail after a year or two. Every part was designed for longevity, often decades worth of daily abuse. The 1962 Marathon, in particular, became a symbol of endurance because of the real-world environments in which it served. Checker taxis were on the road from dawn until long past midnight, carrying hundreds of passengers a day, often driving non-stop for weeks without major maintenance. Drivers would push them through snowstorms, torrential rain, and summer heat, over potholes, railroad tracks, and pothole-ridden streets, yet the cars rarely broke down. Fleet maintenance crews praised them for their reliability. If a Checker came in needing service, it was usually because a tire blew or brakes wore out, not because the engine or drivetrain had failed. In many ways, the Checker Marathon could be considered the first million-mile car, decades before the term became popular. Stories abound of marathon taxis reaching extraordinary mileage without major repairs. In New York City, it was not uncommon for these cars to surpass 500,000 miles on the original engine and transmission, and there are verified accounts of vehicles hitting 1,000,000 miles in service. These cars weren't treated gently. Passengers leaned on doors, drivers ran red lights, and maintenance was often minimal. but the Marathon soldiered on. Its steel body often rusted eventually, particularly in northern climates, but the mechanical heart of the car, the engine, drivetrain, and suspension, was almost indestructible. The interior of the Checker Marathon reflected the same philosophy. It was spacious and functional, designed to maximize passenger comfort and driver ergonomics without unnecessary embellishments. Seats were vinyl and sturdy, floors were simple metal panels, and the dashboard was easy to read and repair. In a city environment where taxis were sometimes used as delivery vehicles, emergency vehicles, and ad hoc ambulances, simplicity and durability mattered more than style. The Marathon excelled at this. Even after leaving the fleet, Checker Marathons often continued to live long lives in private hands. Enthusiasts, collectors, and hobbyists quickly recognized their durability. Barn finds, abandoned city taxis, and retired fleets were restored and preserved, and many of these cars remain operational today, decades later. Some of the original 1962 models are still running, often driven sparingly, but sometimes still showing the same toughness that allowed them to carry thousands of passengers through the unforgiving streets of Manhattan, Boston, and Chicago. Mechanics and drivers often marveled at the car's resilience. One retired NYC taxi driver remembered his 1962 Marathon. It ran for 15 years, over 600,000 miles, never missed a beat. We'd hit potholes, curbs, snow, ice, and it just kept going. I never worried about it breaking down. It was a tank on wheels. Another account from a maintenance shop recalled, "The old Checker engines were like sewing machines. Turn the key and they'd run, no matter what. Parts wore, sure, but nothing killed them." In an era obsessed with style, speed, and flash, the 1962 Checker Marathon reminds us that functionality and durability can be just as impressive, if not more so. It was a car designed not to win races, but to survive them. The daily race of city life, continuous abuse, and relentless mileage. In this sense, the Marathon is almost unique in automotive history, a vehicle whose legend is built entirely on survival. For anyone interested in endurance engineering, practical design, or automotive history, the Checker Marathon stands as a testament to what a car can achieve when it is built to last rather than to impress. If you like, I can expand this into a much longer narrative-style history, including accounts of specific taxis surviving over 1 million miles, their use in multiple cities, stories of drivers who relied on them for decades, and how the Checker Marathon influenced modern taxi design and automotive durability standards. Do you want me to do that? The 1959 Cadillac Series 62 is often remembered for its extravagant tail fins, sweeping chrome, and a design so over-the-top it epitomized late 1950s American automotive excess. But beneath the glamour lay one of the most over-engineered, mechanically resilient cars of its era. While most people think of Cadillacs as symbols of luxury and status, the Series 62, particularly with its big block V8, was also an enduring mechanical marvel, capable of surviving decades of neglect and still coming back to life with minimal effort. It wasn't just a car you drove, it was a machine built to last, a testament to a time when American engineers weren't afraid to make things bigger, heavier, and stronger than necessary. At the heart of the 1959 Series 62 was Cadillac's 390 cubic inch V8, producing roughly 325 horsepower, a number that barely conveys the sheer heft and torque of the engine. These were long-stroke pushrod engines with massive crankshafts, thick main bearings, and overbuilt internal components designed to handle both the weight of the enormous Cadillac body and decades of faithful service. Unlike many high-performance or exotic engines of the era, which demanded meticulous maintenance, the 390 V8 thrived on regular care and could tolerate occasional neglect. Stories abound of barn-found Cadillacs sitting idle for 20, 30, or even 40 years, which would roar back to life almost immediately once given fresh fuel and a few basic fluids.
The Series 62 wasn't just about a big engine. Cadillac engineers applied the same philosophy to the transmission, suspension, and drivetrain. The Hydromatic automatic transmission was smooth, robust, and surprisingly forgiving, capable of enduring countless shifts under city traffic or highway cruising without failure. The rear axle and differential were overbuilt, with oversized gears and sturdy housings designed to last well beyond the typical life expectancy of the car. Even the brakes, which many expected to fail under decades of disuse, proved surprisingly durable. Collectively, these features made the Series 62 not just a luxury showpiece, but a mechanically reliable vehicle capable of remarkable longevity. The massive body itself contributed to the car's durability. The steel panels were thick, the frame strong, and the interior could withstand years of use without completely falling apart. Cadillacs were built with attention to detail that extended beyond aesthetics. Body mounts were solid, sheet metal joints reinforced, and the chassis over-engineered to minimize flexing. While corrosion could eventually attack the body in wet climates, the mechanical heart of the car often remained intact, ready to spring back to life even after decades in storage. Owners and collectors alike marveled at how these cars seemed almost immune to the passage of time. One enthusiast recalled discovering a 1959 Series 62 in a garage in the Midwest, untouched for nearly 25 years. He said, "The interior smelled like an old barn. The paint had faded, but I turned the key and it fired right up. The engine sounded perfect, the transmission shifted smoothly, and the brakes worked. I couldn't believe it. It was like finding a sleeping giant." Another example comes from a collector in the South who revived a car after 30 years of sitting. He said, "I expected to rebuild the engine, replace everything, but it ran perfectly with just oil, gas, and a battery. It was amazing." The Series 62 also became a staple for owners who valued both luxury and reliability. Unlike sports cars, which often demanded constant maintenance, or mid-century compacts, which could be prone to rust or wear, the Cadillac combined comfort, power, and resilience. Families used them for long-distance cruising, city driving, and weekend trips, confident that the car could handle miles of abuse. Chauffeurs and executives similarly appreciated the car's ability to perform reliably even under heavy usage without the frequent repairs that plagued less robust vehicles. In the broader context of automotive history, the 1959 Cadillac Series 62 represents an era when American cars were not just designed for performance or aesthetics, they were built as enduring machines, engineered to survive decades of use. The big V8, overbuilt drivetrain, and strong chassis ensured that these cars could sit idle for years and still come back to life with startling ease. Today, the Series 62 is celebrated for its design and luxury, but for enthusiasts who understand mechanical resilience, it is also a testament to an era of automotive engineering where durability was not an afterthought, it was central to the car's DNA. In essence, the 1959 Cadillac Series 62 is more than just a showpiece of automotive excess. It is a monument to over-engineering done right. Its massive V8, solid drivetrain, and overbuilt components made it nearly immortal, a car that could sit for decades, be neglected, and still thunder back to life as if it had never stopped. It is a reminder that luxury and endurance need not be mutually exclusive, and that sometimes the most remarkable cars are not the fastest or the flashiest, but the ones that simply refuse to die. If you want, I can expand this further into a much longer epic narrative, weaving in real-life anecdotes of restored barn founds, owners who revived 1959 Series 62s after decades, and comparisons to other indestructible engines of the 1950s and 1960s, turning it into a full saga of Cadillac durability. Do you want me to do that? The 1968 International Harvester Travelall occupies a unique place in automotive history, often overlooked in favor of later SUVs or the more glamorous American full-size wagons of the late 60s. But in its own right,
It was a mechanical titan, a vehicle designed not for speed, style, or luxury, but for sheer, unflinching durability and practicality. Long before the SUV became a lifestyle statement, the Travelall set the standard for utility, toughness, and the ability to endure abuse that would leave most modern vehicles crumpled, overheated, or dead in their tracks. For farmers, hunters, utility workers, and even fire departments, the Travelall was less a car and more a tool, a rolling workhorse that could be counted on to handle years of grueling service. Built on the same truck chassis as International Harvester's pickups, the Travelall inherited all the advantages of truck-based engineering: solid axles, heavy-duty leaf springs, and a frame that could support massive loads without flexing. Its body was enormous, designed to carry multiple passengers in gear, yet it was engineered to endure decades of hard use. The interior was simple, almost utilitarian, with minimal trim, vinyl seats, and a straightforward dashboard. Comfort was secondary. Function was everything. Owners quickly realized that the Travelall could haul people, livestock, tools, and equipment across the roughest terrain imaginable without complaining or failing mechanically. Under the hood, the 1968 Travelall typically carried International Harvester's robust V8 or inline-six engines. These engines were not about refined power or efficiency. They were about endurance. Heavy cast iron blocks, oversized components, and thick crankshafts meant these engines could withstand heat, towing, and long hours of operation that would cripple more delicate units. Mechanics often marveled at the simplicity. A few basic adjustments, regular lubrication, and fresh fuel were enough to keep the engine running almost indefinitely. These weren't cars designed to sit in garages. They were designed to move constantly, and they excelled at it. The Travelall's 4WD system, available on many models, was no afterthought. Its transfer case and drivetrain components were built to survive years of off-road abuse, allowing farmers to cross muddy fields, hunters to penetrate dense forests, and utility workers to reach remote locations where roads were non-existent. Its ground clearance, solid axles, and simple mechanical systems made it nearly impossible to immobilize in real-world conditions. It wasn't fast, and the ride was harsh, but it was a car that got the job done, reliably and repeatedly. Stories of Travelall longevity abound. Farmers would use them daily to carry feed, livestock, or heavy machinery across rough farmland, and the vehicles often lasted decades. Fire departments in rural communities relied on Travellalls to transport personnel and equipment to emergency scenes, and many vehicles survived extreme heat, water, and smoke exposure while continuing to operate. Hunters prized them for their ability to navigate rivers, snow, and dense underbrush, often towing trailers or carrying gear that would destroy lesser SUVs. Even after decades of service, Travellalls could be brought back to life with basic maintenance, a testament to their overbuilt components and truck-like engineering. Unlike contemporary SUVs, which often prioritize comfort, electronics, and style, the Travelall simplicity was its greatest asset. There were no complex fuel injection systems, no delicate electronics to fry in the field, and no lightweight unibody construction that would buckle under heavy loads. The design philosophy was brutally practical. Make a vehicle that can haul, tow, survive punishment, and keep running even when neglected. In many ways, the Travelall set the template for modern utility vehicles, long before marketing departments began selling SUVs as lifestyle statements rather than workhorses. Collectors today revere the 1968 Travelall, not just for nostalgia, but for proof of its mechanical fortitude. Many original examples are still on the road, decades after leaving showrooms, often with minimal modifications. Some are fully restored, but others are left in working condition, patched and maintained like the true machines they were meant to be. The combination of a truck-based frame, overbuilt engines, rugged suspension, and practical design makes the Travelall an enduring icon of American engineering, a vehicle that could literally be driven into the wilderness, abandoned for years, and returned to service with little more than fresh fuel and fluids. In essence, the 1968 International Harvester Travelall was more than a vehicle, it was a philosophy in motion. It prioritized reliability, durability, and function over style or luxury. Farmers, hunters, fire departments, and adventurers depended on it to survive the harshest conditions, and it rewarded that trust with decades of dependable service. While the modern SUV may be slicker, faster, or more comfortable, no vehicle built today could match the Travelall's combination of rugged construction and longevity. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't glamorous, but it was nearly immortal, a true workhorse in every sense of the word. I can expand this further into an even longer narrative epic, including real stories of Travellalls surviving decades of abuse on farms, in forests, and in utility service, comparisons to early Jeep Wagoneers and Suburbans, and the way it influenced modern SUV engineering. Do you want me to do that?
The 1961 Lincoln Continental is often remembered first and foremost for its arresting design, a car that seemed to float rather than sit on the road, with its clean, almost minimalist body lines, the unforgettable rear-hinged suicide doors, and an elegance that instantly communicated American luxury at its peak. But while its styling made headlines and captured the imaginations of the public, what set the Continental apart from nearly every other luxury car of its era was the underlying mechanical integrity that could make even the most abused or neglected example run for decades. Beneath that long, graceful hood was the Ford-built MEL, Mercury Edsel Lincoln V8, an engine and drivetrain combination designed not just to provide effortless speed and torque, but to endure years of heavy use, making the 1961 Continental not only a statement of style, but a testament to engineering foresight. In short, this was a car built to last a lifetime, or more. The MEL V8, ranging from 430 to 462 cubic inches, depending on configuration, was a work of over-engineering genius. Cast iron blocks and cylinder heads, massive crankshafts, and beefy connecting rods made the engine nearly indestructible under normal operating conditions, while its long-stroke design delivered enormous low-end torque that could effortlessly move the Continental's nearly 2-ton curb weight. While the official ratings hovered around 330 horsepower for the higher output versions, the engine's real achievement wasn't in peak numbers, it was in reliability and longevity. Mechanics of the era often remarked that these engines seemed almost insultingly robust. You could run them hard, leave them parked for years, and they'd fire right up, said one Lincoln specialist, a sentiment echoed by countless owners decades later. There are stories of Continentals sitting untouched for 20, 25, even 30 years in garages or barns, and yet starting immediately once a battery was hooked up and fresh fluids added, the MEL V8 roaring to life as if it had never slept. The durability didn't stop with the engine. Lincoln's engineering team designed the drivetrain and chassis to withstand years of daily use under the heaviest loads. The automatic transmission, often the formidable 3-speed turbodrive unit, was smooth, overbuilt, and surprisingly tolerant of abuse. Coupled with the rear axle and differential engineered to handle the car's immense weight and torque, the Continental became a machine that would glide over highways and city streets alike without breaking a sweat. Suspension components were equally robust, offering comfort without fragility. The fully independent front suspension allowed the long car to corner with unexpected grace, while leaf springs in the rear carried heavy loads with ease. Steering and brakes were simple, straightforward, and reliable, making the car not only comfortable, but incredibly easy to maintain even decades later. The 1961 Lincoln Continental's design philosophy emphasized longevity at every level. Body panels were thick and rigid, resistant to warping or bending under stress, while interior materials were chosen for durability, not mere appearance. Seats, door mechanisms, and even the famed suicide doors were engineered with precision, allowing repeated use over decades without failure. Unlike many of its contemporaries, which would sag, leak, or creak after a few years, the Continental seemed almost built to defy time itself.
Owners frequently discovered that even after years of disuse, the mechanical systems could be revived with little more than basic maintenance, creating an almost mythic reputation for resilience. Real-world stories of Continental endurance abound. One collector found a 1961 model that had been parked in a Midwest garage for 27 years. After installing a fresh battery and changing the oil, the car started immediately, idled perfectly, and drove without issue. Another Lincoln enthusiast reported using a Continental as a daily driver for 15 years, racking up over 250,000 miles with nothing more than regular maintenance, oil changes, occasional fluid flushes, and periodic attention to brakes and tires. A retired chauffeur once described his years behind the wheel. "That car was bulletproof. I drove it in rain, snow, and blistering heat, and it never faltered. I never worried it would break down. It just kept going, day after day." Such anecdotes aren't isolated. They represent the widespread reality that the 1961 Lincoln Continental's engineering was fundamentally designed for longevity. Even the subtle aspects of its design contributed to its durability. The body unit, though elegant, was exceptionally rigid, and combined with the long wheelbase, it allowed for a smooth ride without overstressing the chassis. The steering system, though large and deliberate, was resilient, while brake components were overbuilt to handle the car's mass without fading or failure. Even under hard acceleration, fully loaded with passengers and luggage, the MEL V8 never seemed strained. Its torque was always ready, its components overbuilt to the point of near invincibility. In effect, the Continental wasn't just a luxury car, it was a machine designed for multi-generational service. Beyond the technical aspects, the 1961 Lincoln Continental earned its legendary status because it combined luxury with reliability in a way that few cars could. Muscle cars and performance vehicles of the era grabbed headlines for speed, styling, and daring, but few could match the combination of comfort, power, and endurance. Owners didn't just drive these cars, they relied on them, trusted them, and in many cases, handed them down from one generation to the next. The mechanical robustness meant that the car could survive neglect, storage, and even periods of abandonment, only to be revived decades later as if it had never been touched. In the decades since, the Continental has become a favorite among collectors and enthusiasts, not just for its design, but for its engineering. Barn finds and restored examples often showcase the near miraculous durability of the MEL V8 and the overbuilt chassis. Some original Continentals, with proper care, continue to drive hundreds of miles with all original mechanical components, serving as rolling proof that American engineering at its peak was capable of creating vehicles that could truly endure. In essence, the 1961 Lincoln Continental represents the perfect fusion of elegance and near immortality. Its MEL V8, robust drivetrain, precise engineering, and overbuilt components allowed it to carry passengers in comfort while surviving decades of abuse, neglect, and extended storage. While it was undoubtedly a luxury statement, it was also a quietly indestructible machine. A car whose legacy is defined not just by its beauty or status, but by the astonishing resilience of its engineering. It stands as a reminder that true automotive greatness lies not only in aesthetics or speed, but in the ability to endure, adapt, and survive the passage of time. If you want, I can take this even further, crafting a full epic history of the 1961 Continental that weaves in multiple first-hand owner accounts, barn finds fired up after 40-plus years, mechanical analyses of the MEL V8's durability, and comparisons with other indestructible 1960s luxury engines like the Cadillac 390 and Chrysler 413 Hemi, turning it into an immersive, multi-thousand-word narrative of near mythic endurance. Do you want me to do that?